Well, last time I told you a little bit about my story, which I could summarize basically as leaving the comfort of the ideal and heading into the unknown. Now, I wasn't leaving the comfort of everything that I knew. I wasn't leaving my faith behind, for instance, but I was making myself vulnerable to the things that I didn't know, things that I wasn't sure about. So I told my story in 4 basic chapters, which I'll repeat here just briefly, so you can see how it comes up in what I'm going to share next. But if you haven't listened to or watched that first episode, I'd encourage you to go back and do that. My first chapter was growing up evangelical. My second chapter was when I decided very firmly that my faith was the most important thing about me. My third chapter was the book I hated. There was this book that had a lot of ideas about Christianity that I didn't agree with, and it really caused me a lot of inner turmoil. And then as I worked through that, I came to my fourth chapter, which had me coming to a point where I said an evangelical shouldn't be afraid to ask any questions. So I had come quite a long ways from sort of being afraid and angry about certain questions in certain territory to being curious and open, because we don't need to be afraid of the truth wherever it should lead. Well, in this episode, I want to talk about one of my absolute favorite metaphors, leaving the Shire. Now, this metaphor is from The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. If you haven't read or seen those stories, as they're now movies, then not really sure what to tell you. But if you haven't, they're about these hobbits. They're these little creatures. They look kind of like humans. They're just smaller. And they live in a place called the Shire. So I'm going to take you on 3 parts of this metaphor. First is the Shire itself. Second is the adventure that they go on. Third is the return back home. And all of these elements are very important, and they're about a lot more than a story. They're about your life if you're paying attention. So the first one is the Shire. The Shire is this beautiful, serene place. There's these homes that are under the hill, and it's wonderful. It seems like the weather's always nice. And it seems like a place that you'd want to live and raise your family and all of that. Most hobbits are content to stay there and to live there. And this represents what you see as true. It represents your values. It represents your comforts. It represents your lifestyle. You're comfortable with it. So this, in my own story, growing up evangelical, that was my Shire. My faith being the most important thing about me, that was my Shire. As I got ready to sort of leave home, to leave Shire in a certain way, I kind of took it with me. I took home with me, which is a normal thing to do. Now, the Shire it seems very ideal, but it's not perfect. And it's not perfect for the simple fact that nothing is perfect. We're not perfect. So this isn't like some criticism of the Shire. It's just coming face to face with reality. There's this wonderful scene in The Fellowship of the Ring, the first movie in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where there's this grumpy hobbit and Gandalf the wizard comes to town, and these children are running after him, and the grumpy hobbit is just like, kind of looking at the kids, and then they want Gandalf to shoot off these fireworks. And so Gandalf, acts like he's not going to, and then he shoots them off. And the grumpy hobbit all of a sudden he's like laughing and smiling because he's happy that Gandalf made these kids happy. And then his wife shoots him a dirty look, and the grumpy hobbit goes back to being grumpy. And this represents the book that I hated. It's like, wait, we're not supposed to like this foreign stuff, are we? And if you start to read it and you're like, oh, it has a point, but then you look around and someone else is telling you, no, you shouldn't like that. So that's what that sort of represents in my story, and represents a whole lot more. But in The Hobbit, the closer you look, the more you realize that Some of the hobbits have these like theories about the outside world that are maybe more based on fear and paranoia than actual fact. A lot of people are used to the Shire and they're suspicious of others. Okay, if I'm not describing American society today, I don't know what I'm doing. At the same time, lots of people in the Shire are humble, they're hardworking. Gandalf ends up selecting hobbits from the Shire for his adventure because they're ideal, and he praises them for that. So the Shire should not be understood either as a good thing or a bad thing. It simply is reality, for better or for worse, that we have crafted. And it applies to all of us. So that's the first element of the metaphor, the Shire. The second, equally important, is the adventure. Okay, the adventure. So when I came to my own story and I said, I shouldn't be afraid of asking any question, I was saying yes to the adventure. That's important. So in the stories, some people know that they have to go on the adventure. This is like, Frodo Baggins. He doesn't necessarily want to all the time, but he knows, I've got to do this. Bilbo Baggins and The Hobbit is kind of the same way. They both have hesitations, but they know, okay, I just have to do this. Now, some people are loyal to those who have to go on the adventure. This is Samwise Gamgee. So they don't necessarily see the same urgency themselves, but they see what their friend is doing is good and is important. And so they have this confidant who goes with them. Then there's other people who kind of get swept along with it, and they're not really sure how they got there. And this is Merry and Pippin, who complete the foursome of hobbits who leave the Shire. So this is interesting as well, because within that group, the two who get swept away, one of them, Merry, becomes very, very into the mission, just much like Frodo. And Pippin, however, takes kind of longer to come around. And in fact, at one point, things get tough, and Pippin says, "You know what, Merry? Like, we still have the Shire." And Merry says something very interesting, which I'll get to in just a minute. But the adventure is all about, for Frodo, for instance, he's got to take the ring, this corrupting threat of Middle-earth, and destroy it. And it seems impossible. It seems impossible, but it's clearly the right thing to do. So the adventure is all about what seems impossible and facing it, going on the adventure, realizing that it is possible. And going on the adventure ends up being good for others, and it ends up being good for yourself. Okay, so you've got the Shire, you've got the adventure, and then the final part that I'll talk about is the return. You have to return home. Okay, in The Hobbit, in the book of The Hobbit, there's a really, really interesting feature that Tolkien put in there for those who are paying close attention. So in this climactic battle, you've got the forces of evil, and they come up, and they've got these red and black banners, and this is this very vivid thing that kind of sticks with you. Well, after the battle and after Bilbo goes back home to the Shire, there's some people who are trying to auction off the stuff in his home. And guess what colors the sign is? The sign is red and black. Okay? There's something to that. Okay, there's another thing that's telling you something very similar. Bilbo and all hobbits live in these homes under hills. They're made into the hill, and so the home is under the hill. Well, Bilbo has to leave his home under the hill to go and help these dwarves take back their kingdom under the mountain. So their kingdom is literally within a mountain. Okay, so you've got a connection, now two connections, from home to the adventure. There's a third, and this is from Lord of the Rings. When Pippin, remember I said Pippin says to Merry, maybe we can go back when it gets too difficult. He says that to him. What does Merry say? Merry says, Pippin, if we go back, there won't, or yeah, if we don't enter into the fray, if we don't do the hard thing, there won't be a Shire. Okay, so the adventure is inseparably tied to the home. Okay, now that's interesting enough, but what does it mean? Well, it might help you to have this perspective. There's a chapter in the Gospel of Matthew. There's a chapter in the Gospel of Matthew that is very much the same type of teaching. So in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus sends out his disciples on a mission. He gives them authority over unclean spirits, and they're to do a lot of the things that Jesus himself has been doing. And it's interesting how Jesus describes it, because he starts off by, he's giving them instructions, and he talks about how disciples can be worthy and how the recipients they come to can be worthy. So that a disciple can be worthy or not. A recipient of the message can be worthy or not. And so he says things like, the worker is worthy of his support. Whatever city or village you enter, inquire who is worthy in it. If the house is worthy, give it your blessing. So there's this idea of, you be worthy, and some will be worthy and some won't. But there's also this connection to, it's not just that you're going out there on the adventure, you're also going to homes. And it's the homes that the disciples were supposed to be received into. So if they're worthy, they'll receive you in. If they're not, then they're just going to, kick you to the curb, which is part of what makes the mission scary. So Jesus starts to talk about how as you go out there, some people are going to reject you, and he uses the language of households to do it. Brother will betray brother to death. A child will rise up against his parents. So he uses the language of a household. Well, then he encourages them in what seems to be the central part of the chapter. Jesus encourages them, why go on this adventure if people are going to oppose us, and if I can't even find a home to enter into, or at least, they're few and far between. Well, Jesus says something really interesting. He says, if they've called the head of the house, that's me, Jesus says, Beelzebul, which is a derogatory, demonic even term, how much more will they malign the members of his household? Okay? So, in other words, you're part of my household. So don't worry so much if people aren't inviting you into theirs. Just remember you're part of mine. So he goes on to say very, very strong things. Those who've found their life will lose it. He who's lost his life for my sake will find it. So just pay attention to whose house you belong to. And he ends the instruction by talking again about how those who receive you will receive a reward, and so they'll be worthy. But it's all about, you leave your home, you go on this dangerous mission, realizing whose household you belong to, and some are going to accept you into their household and some won't, but don't worry about that. Just stay true to your mission. Well, that is exactly the metaphor that The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are using, and I do think that there's some connection to that, and you can see that in many places in the Bible, not just there. But the important thing to highlight here is that your home, your household, your brothers rising up against each other, children rising up against parents, and vice versa, that is saying, when you embrace the truth, whatever that truth might be, when you see something that is worth living for, and even worth dying for, your household might not see it the same way. This is the Shire. The Shire doesn't understand why some of these hobbits have to leave and go on an adventure. It's the same way there. So, a lot of people, they're going to want to stay in the Shire. They're going to want to avoid the scary world. But if you avoid the scary world and stay in the Shire, you have to kind of turn a blind eye to the problems at home. So, what's the solution? Well, the Bible says, and Tolkien says in his wonderful story, don't avoid either the problems at home or in the world. You have to face them both. You have to face the truth of the situation of both. And again, this isn't about saying that the Shire or the adventure are good or that they're bad in these simplistic categories that we make. It's just recognizing that nothing's perfect, and we have to face the truth and put our best foot forward in whatever we do in life. So, as Jesus said, if you lose your life, if you face the scary thing, you're really going to find it. And there's so much truth to that is rarely tapped into in the church. But anyway, in my own story, I started asking some very honest questions. And I came to a point in my story that I told last time where I realized, you know what? I don't have all the answers. I feel like I have a lot of them, but I don't have them all. And I'm tired of being afraid of asking the honest questions. I just want to see where the truth leads me. Now, I have asked lots of questions since then. Some of the answers have been very intriguing. Most of the answers have been intriguing to others I've shared them with. But not all of them have been accepted by people that I'm used to in my Shire. And not all of them would be accepted in the outside world. But Jesus tells us that's okay. This metaphor of the Shire would tell us that's okay. Just go on the adventure.